Hi, I'm Dawn Bjork with K-Squared Technologies. Welcome to our monthly webinar training series. Today's session is on increasing engagement with Microsoft PowerPoint. In this session, we're going to explore a number of built-in tools in PowerPoint that will help you to create more interesting presentations that will also help to engage your audience. One of those is to leverage design ideas. This is a built-in artificial intelligence feature in PowerPoint. We'll also look at how we can add more interaction through the use of hyperlinks and action buttons. And we'll explore adding transitions, video, and animation, once again, to create more interest, not as a distraction, but to have something that isn't just a flat presentation with plain text slides. And then you'll also see how you can add interaction and engagement through the use of sections and a feature in PowerPoint called Zoom. I know we hear the term Zoom more frequently for the platform, for instance, that we're meeting today with, but this is also another built-in feature in PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and see what these features are. Let's explore those. Now, I do want to mention last month, we also had a session on creating and delivering more interesting and compelling PowerPoint presentations. So look for that on our YouTube channel down the road. So we'll make sure we get that posted for you so that you can also learn more about PowerPoint. I encourage you as well, share your questions either through chat or the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll do our best to address those during this training, or I will follow up with you afterwards. So sit back and let's go ahead and explore some of the options that are available in PowerPoint. Now, as we explore PowerPoint, one of the things to keep in mind is that animation is a way for us to be able to kind of control the sequence of the presentation, the items that we want to share. You know, as an audience member, that it's easy for us to read ahead. It's easy for us to read everything on the slide and then we go check our phone for our email or otherwise. So some of these topics were reviewed in our previous session. I'll just touch on it briefly though. For animation, we look at a slide, for instance, that might have pretty dense text. So let's just say for the instance, this one. Now there's some other ways that we could handle that. In our previous session, we looked at how we might want to use Smartart or use some other tools to add interest to this text as well. But if we want to apply animation, we can simply select that text, that placeholder, and move to our animations tab. Now then look at what type of animation. Now, when it's text, make sure that you are not flying in and that the text itself should not move in its position. That is distracting and will defeat the whole point of why you want to add this as an engagement. That is, when we talk about engagement, we're looking at something that's positive, not just a bunch of movement. So things that are simple, for instance, a wipe could be an option there. Now I'd rather have that come in from the left because we read from the left to the right. So we've already have that applied, and all we have to do is confirm under our effect options, that is, what is that sequence? And so as it was previewing for us, we can see then that each one of these would come up one at a time. I'll go ahead then and start from this slide as very quickly to present this, and we can see that we can then change that order. Now, I'm not suggesting that you apply animation to every single slide, because that can also be fatiguing for your audience. But it's something to consider in terms of how you can control it, rather than, for instance, especially a more technical topic, rather than just putting all of the content straight up. So something to at least consider. Now, even if it's graphics, for instance, Smartart, something that we talked about as well in our previous webinar, we could select this as well. Choose a way to introduce it. Now that we could have this be a wipe or a fade. And then once again, how do we want to change, or what are the effect options? So in this case, I want to do one at a time. And once again, we can preview that. Now, these are options that I simply added to my quick access toolbar so that I could easily test or work with these different features. You can also find them under the slideshow tab. So that's another option for us as well. So let's look at that again. Once again, being able to control the order, even if it's graphics. So whether it's Smartart, text, a chart, what are some options to consider for animation? Another way for us to have more interactive, engaging presentations is through the use of hyperlinks and action buttons. So by that, let's look at something that is a pretty straightforward presentation. It might be something you use for onboarding or other topics. So it doesn't have a lot of graphics or fancy components to it, but there's some different options that we might look at for this. So for instance, let's say that I have a workbook or something else that I want to link to, or I want to make sure that there's content that people can link to. In this case, I could highlight that text. So for instance, here, I'll just highlight this. And now I'll create a hyperlink. So a hyperlink, one way to find that is to simply go to Insert and Link. We can also use Control-K for that. And so in this case, what I'll do is navigate to the location where I would find that file. And then we can select this. So if this wasn't internal, if it was external, make sure that this is available in a public location, but it could also be an internal location. Maybe it's a PDF, maybe it's an Excel workbook. All of those are options. In this case, I'm simply linking to a Word document so that this is the text I wanted to say. This is what I want to be opened at that time. And we'll go ahead and OK. So this is creating a hyperlink. Once again, if I launch that presentation or distribute it, now I could actually have this be a clickable link that would actually open up. Well, maybe not at this point. That's OK. But it will work for us in terms of opening up that document. So that's one of the other things that we can also do for that. So remember, I mentioned you want to make sure that's available online. You also, in this case, I need to make sure that I'm logged into the right location. But that's the idea for that to be a clickable link. And maybe it's just a clickable link to a website page that you have or some other document. Another way to create interaction is through action buttons. You might notice this in the upper right-hand corner. So once again, this can be really helpful when we have something that maybe is simply shared with staff, or it's something that you might even have on a website, for instance. And so in that case, if we move to, here we have our topics, for instance. This might be our main table of contents. Or think about how this might be helpful for you as a presenter to be able to go back to and have a little bit more flexibility with your presentation. And so with that, let's say that I'm on a slide, and I'll go ahead and launch that once again. And I could simply click on this button, and it takes me right back to that table of contents. And now I could move to another one, because that is the action button is actually creating a hyperlink. So that's another way for us to do this as well. So that becomes an interesting option for us in terms of how we work with it. So let's go ahead then and see once again how we could create that. So notice here, these are also hyperlinks. And so just since we just looked at that, I'll touch on this one more time, because the last one was how we look at something external. In this case, I'll highlight the text and once again, insert and link, or Control K. And now what I really want is not an existing file, but a place in this document, which is I want it to link to the page for benefits, and then OK. So that creates another option for me as well. So that's another example of a hyperlink. But let's look at how we can create that action button. Now, you won't have the advantage of having it already created for you. So let's say that we want to put one into the benefits. We start with insert and then shapes. Shapes. You've likely created lots of different shapes in PowerPoint. In this case, it's at the very bottom of your screen, and we can look for that. Here we have action buttons. Now explore those, because some of these are just have built-in purposes, like going home, which would be the first slide in the presentation. Going back and forth. All of these are possibilities. In this case, I'm going to create a blank one. And with that, then my mouses. There we go. Let's try that again. We'll go to shapes, blank, and what should happen, which it is not working very well here. So let's go ahead and try it one more time. Yeah, what I'm looking for is that my mouse should change to a crosshair, just like creating any other shape. And so we'll click and drag here for this. You would only have to create it once in a document, and you would notice that you have these alignment lines that also show up. That is helpful. And in this case, what I want to do is there's a lot of different things that those action buttons could do for you. Most commonly is that we want it to move to a particular slide, but you can see that there's a few other possibilities there. In this case, I want it to be a hyperlink to, and it could be to the next slide, to another slide, whatever it might be. And here I will actually, it could go to a website. Notice all these options. And I'm going to say to a specific slide, because I want it to go to slide 2, which is where we have those agenda or topics covered. And then OK. So now I've set the purpose, intention of that. And now I want to do one more thing, and that is to label it. So I right click, we choose edit text, and we can say, type in here topics, or anything else you want is a descriptive entry. Change the text as you like, maybe make it bold or change the color on it. These are all options for you. Then now you have your action button. Let's see how that works for us. Once again, I will launch. We can also do this with Shift F5. Here's the action button. Notice it has a click, little finger pointing. I click on that. It takes me right back to the topics. Here are my hyperlinks to go to specific pages. And then here is, once again, that action button. So think of those for creating more engagement and interaction with presentations that you might, where it might make sense, you want to have a flexibility of moving around, whether it's a marketing presentation, maybe an onboarding or other types of internal staff presentation. But these will let you build things in so that you can make it easier to create that engagement and that interaction. So that becomes another option for you to consider. One of the other really interesting features that we have available in PowerPoint is something called design ideas. Design ideas. Perhaps you've seen this. Now, I want to mention that this is only available if you have Microsoft 365. So for the Microsoft Office 365 applications. It was previously available with some of the licensed versions of PowerPoint, but that is no longer the case. So that would be definitely a justification if you haven't yet moved to Microsoft 365, I think you're going to see some really interesting options. So design ideas is built-in artificial intelligence. It's going to evaluate your content and offer suggestions. Now, one of the things that is good to know is that if you have a very customized template or master for your presentations, design ideas might not work with it. Here I'm using a presentation layout or format called Retrospect. That is, PowerPoint is one of many templates I can get from PowerPoint, and it works for that. But if you're finding that design ideas doesn't work for you for some reason, you can always create the slide in a blank presentation and then copy the content in. But most importantly, let's look and see what this means. Now, first of all, because I'm going to be making a lot of changes here, I want to be able to make a copy of the original. So rather than even doing a save as, I'll simply do Control-D for duplicate. So we have a topic here that you might not think is very compelling, and that is about procurement planning. However, let's see what we might be able to do with that. So if I engage here from the Home tab, Design Ideas, look what happens. PowerPoint is suggesting a variety of different ways to lay it out. In some cases, it's just a matter of a little bit different option for the title. So how can we display that text differently? In some cases, it might add a little bit of an icon for you. So you can explore these, and this is why I recommend that you make a copy, because if you want to go back to what it was originally, that can be a little bit more challenging. But you can continue to explore, and PowerPoint will keep suggesting different ways for you to work with that. So that becomes a really interesting option to add interest, which can add engagement. That is, especially because many of us have been staring at screens for the last year and a half. That is to have something that has a little bit more visual interest, that has more movement to it, and can make this more appealing. So let's look at another possibility. What happens now if I add an image? So, well, I'll go ahead here and I'm going to then insert picture from it's an image that I have that now we always want to make sure that it is either paid for or royalty free. We don't want to just be going out and doing a Google search for that, because that is going to be a problem because you may not have the rights to use it. In this case, I'll simply grab a simple image here, and now I've added it to my title slide. Look what's happening. Design Ideas is evaluating that and looking at that to say, well, here's one option. Or maybe you like this one. Or what about this? So you no longer have to feel like you have to have graphic skills to be able to make these things happen with the design ideas. And it's that alone will create much more interesting presentations for you, yet it's all built in. It isn't something that requires a separate fee. It doesn't require, taking classes on becoming a graphic designer. It simply is another option for you. And all we did, we had a title slide, added an image to it, and now we have some other possibilities. So that becomes another option for you too. Now here's another example. Once again, I'll do Control D just so we can see some different choices. Nothing wrong with it. It's a simple bullet list. But look what Design Ideas is suggesting. Based upon the words, here we're getting a suggestion with images, icons. And seems to me that that's pretty smart in terms of how it's showing that. And here that gives us, once again, a much more interesting look at how we might work with it. And these could also be animated. So that's, right now they're just coming up as flat, and that might be absolutely fine for you. But then you could also apply animation to each one of those individual stages and pieces there. So with just Design Ideas, you have new possibilities in terms of how you can make your presentations much more interesting. So here's another example, another one, another one. Now, if for any reason you don't like the particular image you have, it's good to know that PowerPoint now has built-in stock images. These include photos, icons, and other types of images that you can use absolutely free. They're royalty-free, and they're part of PowerPoint. So if you saw something here that you wanted to change for any reason, you can actually click on that icon, look for this little Smart tag pops up, and you can replace your icon. So maybe we look at that and say, oh, I want to change that to money. That would be an option. Or I could say see all icons. And this will launch then the stock images, and you can see lots of different images. So maybe I type in the word money to kind of filter that and to look at some different options that we might have in terms of working with that. So that becomes then another choice for you. And in this case, here's the one that we saw before. Maybe I'll select that and insert it. And so we're simply able to then have the flexibility to shift how that works. Please share your questions, or if there's anything you'd like to see again or have me repeat, just feel free to drop that in chat and let me know. But that is Design Ideas. I'll share with you a few other examples of how this would work for us. All right, so let's go ahead and look then at how this also works for us with images. Regardless of your industry, your business, you likely will have images that reflect what you do or the services that you offer, services and products that you offer. Yet, once again, we don't have to know how to lay those out. So whether it's something you have from various locations out on the field, maybe it's images of your products, you can just drop those in. And here again, I'll do Control D to duplicate. I could right click, by the way, and also duplicate, but the keyboard shortcut's Control D. So now these have just been inserted without much layout for that. But all we have to do now is go to Design Ideas. And by the way, it's in the Home tab at the very end. If you don't see it there, that means that maybe your version of PowerPoint doesn't support it. So under the Design tab is also Design Ideas. So it's available through Microsoft 365. Here we have Design Ideas, and notice how easily we could create very interesting slides here with just a few clicks. So how much time would you save by just taking advantage of this built-in feature? How would you be able to use this? Here's another example. Once again, we don't even have to size those. Notice that they're evenly spaced. You might, the other reason why I sometimes like to have copies of the original is if I want to kind of reposition some of these or just see what happens if I put them in a little bit different place. But that's the idea of Design Ideas, once again, in terms of working with creating, quite interesting and more engaging presentations. So how can you use that? There's a few other pieces that I'll share with you for the Design Ideas, and then we'll move into some of the other helpful and time-saving features available in PowerPoint. Perhaps you have a timeline. In this case, this is simply, it might be a schedule. I'll go ahead and copy this. It's a schedule that you have for a project or a product or anything that's coming up. Now, this is not going to give you a project management timeline with really accurate positionings on a calendar. It is more to give you a visual. So keep that in mind as you see some of the examples. But in this case now, if I have this listed out, PowerPoint is smart enough to be able to detect, oh, well, maybe, do you want it to look like this? Here are some different timelines. So you can see that it's not necessarily showing proportionally how it would appear on a calendar, but it definitely creates a more interesting visual than just a simple bullet list. And so these are all different possibilities for that. Now, in this case, this is another example where icons were added. I think it's pretty impressive in terms of the kinds of images that are used just based upon those words that it's capturing. And as we saw before, we can always change the icon. So there's a lot of different ways to go with that. So that is another variation off of the Design Ideas. Now here's a completely different one with an image added. In this case, it's not adding a timeline, it's simply giving you another way to be able to present this information. And then let's finally look at the idea of adding stock images, because that's another built-in piece. These are, as I mentioned, royalty-free images. Expect these to continue to be added, expanded. They are also available to you in your Word documents and Excel. So they're not, there's not millions of different possibilities yet, but it might be enough for you to be able to find something that captures the idea that you want. So once again, we go to Insert, and here we look at pictures. The last time I brought in something that was, we'll say, an external or third-party image. In this case, we'll go to Stock Images. So there's images, icons, cutout people. Now this is an interesting piece because there are different themes. And so you actually can go to different groups of images. The advantage of these is that they don't have a white background. And so you can place them on top of a colored background or other content and that will improve the professionalism that you have as well. So you can actually go through, and so you can see that there's lots of different personalities here, a lot of different people that you can add in working with that. There's stickers and even videos and illustrations. So we'll look at the videos here as well. So let's go back to our images here. And since we had that theme before of money, and so you can see that we might not have a whole, I think that's a money plant, but I'm not sure of that. Or maybe I want to just simply have it be business. And so you can see that there's some different possibilities, whether they're concepts or people or other types of things. And so lots of different options for you in terms of how you might add something. And it simply not only is added to your image, but now we get suggestions from design ideas. It's that easy to be able to add more visual interest, whether it's an in-person or a virtual presentation, but you have those possibilities. So explore how you can take advantage of design ideas and the built-in images to be able to create more interest and interaction, engagement with your presentations. Another way that we can also add interest is through the use of creating sections and working with a feature called Zoom. And definitely let me know through chat if you have any questions about what you see, or if there's anything that I can address for you. So sections is a feature that's been around for a few versions, and it is a way to help organize your presentation. Now, in our previous training for PowerPoint, one of the things I stressed is that you really want to spend the upfront time for planning your presentation. So you have an obvious order or structure to it, and it's not just creating one slide and creating another one and creating another one. So that will also help to keep your audience more engaged because you have an obvious flow to it and they're less confused in terms of what's happening. So notice, for instance, that in this presentation, there are various groupings like charts and tables, Smartart, animations, and others as well. These are sections. These are sections. Now, I'm looking at it from the slide sorter view. I can also look at it from what we'd say is our normal view. Notice what happens, for instance, especially with a longer presentation. By adding a section, this becomes collapsible. And so that can actually make it really much easier for you to organize, move around, and manage your presentation. So whether it's the normal view or the slide sorter view, you can see that you can work with those. Now, in this case, then, what I want to do is, let's look at this from the slide sorter, make this a little bit easier. Here I have a section that is for Smartart. Now, just to pause for a moment about these section slides. Section slides are a variation of a title slide. So if I was going to insert a new slide, let me go ahead and just open this up. We'll go to Home, New Slide, and you can see you could have a section header. So that's a little different than a title slide because the intention is that it is just like this, that it is for main sections of your presentation rather than to introduce your presentation. Notice as well, I'm taking advantage of the icons that are built in. And so the combination of design ideas and those icons gives me ability to have a standard look. And I could copy those and set those up. But now I have a more obvious structure and flow. That is, when we get to the section slide, that's going to imply, oh, we're changing our thought or our content or our focus, rather than once again have it just be this kind of linear presentation of what can sometimes seem like they're unrelated or discontinued, not connected slides. So we have this one for Smartart. Now, if I want to add a section to it, and this would apply, you don't have to have any sections, and you wouldn't have to have section slides for those sections, but you can see where that might make a lot of sense. Any place you want to add a section, it is for your own organization purposes, but it also, as you can see, it is ability to collapse, and we'll see how this works with the zoom feature. So I'm going to right click, and here is add section, add section. So in this case, I'll have an untitled section. I'll call this Smartart. So now I have that section. I can collapse it at any point, and you can maybe PowerPoint will even tell me how many slides I have for that. So how handy can that be for you as a way to easily navigate, organize, and really be able to focus on those portions of the presentation that are most important to you? Any way that we can create more interest, relevant visual interest, but also add the organization to it. This definitely gives us a lot of value. So that's another thing to consider is working with sections. Now, one of the things that we have available to us is a feature called Zoom. Now, and we hear a lot about Zoom, but this is actually a feature inside of PowerPoint. It's available for PowerPoint for Microsoft 365 and PowerPoint 2019. And what it does is it's a way to create, once again, more engagement or interaction. So sections can be helpful for it to build it. Now, know that what I'll share with you is if you didn't have sections already, then the Zoom feature would build those for you. So here's how we work with Zoom. We go to Insert, and here is the Zoom feature. And we're going to do a summary zoom. That's what that's going to be our most common that we will use with this. And what will happen is that it will show you all the slides. Now, in this case, these already have sections. And so that's why these particular slides are selected already. But if they were not sections, you could then click on any slides you want that you want to use to create as a key area in your presentation. That's the thing. These are ones that you want to have as an upfront, we'll say, interactive menu that you can work with. And so what happens with this is that you can see we'll just preview this, make sure it doesn't select anything that we didn't want to use, and looks good for this. And what we're going to do is insert that. Now, what happens is that this is inserted at the very beginning of the presentation. And I realized I had one more. I really don't want that one because it added one more thing that I was interested in. So I'm going to delete that and try it again, only because I didn't want this first title slide. Everything else is good. And now I have 6 slides selected. So that's great. I'll go ahead and insert. And now we have this summary section. Let's see what that works like. I'm just double clicking on it. You can see that It's set up here. I can go ahead and run it. These are each of those main sections. So I can actually go ahead and click on it. And it will take me to that location. So think about those action buttons before. It takes me to that location. And when I'm done with that section, now it comes back to the main table of contents. Now that's an option. You don't have to use it, but that's an option of how this works for us. So when it's selected, notice that we have this new Zoom ribbon tab only when we're on this item. And here's the option, return to Zoom. That's what happens. Now, if you don't want that to happen, you can just keep in mind that you know the slide number in this case, it's 4 right now, but that would be another option. And we can make this even more interesting. So I'm going to select this image and I'll go ahead and copy it. I'll just do Control C, and I might have a different slide that I'd like to paste it into. And now I've got something that might be a little bit more interesting, but I've got that summary section, that summary slide. I'll go ahead and try that again. And we can simply then click on it. We could go through those different options. I won't go through all those, but the idea here is that this becomes an upfront interface by using that Zoom. Is that something that would be helpful for you? Is that something you might try? So that's something to consider. Now, let's go to one of our previous examples here. We talked about having that action button, but we also could do something a little different. So in this case, here I'll go ahead and do Insert Zoom. So remember last time it was that I just did a summary zoom, but here I'll go ahead and do a slide zoom. So I could actually just have this be an image rather than have it be that clickable button, an image. And what would happen is that image could then be inserted, and I might just put that up there in the corner as a clickable link. So that becomes another option. It's a slide zoom. Now, I'll run that slot, that part of the presentation. See, it's clickable. It takes me right to that slide. So that's another consideration as you are building your presentations. How can you create this interaction? One of the challenges we have often as presenters is that we either don't have as much time as we were promised. Maybe the conversation has, there's questions in the middle, and that's always great if people want to be engaged and have questions, but we might be a little bit short of time. Or we might have some things built in that we might not be able to cover normally, but now all of a sudden we get an extra 5-10 minutes and we can work with those. So by adding flexibility and also structure at the same time, talked about this in our last training, we then have the ability to quickly move to other locations or even to skip some of the content that we might not have time for without having to click, 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 click through all of those options. So explore how that might be helpful for you. So explore how you can use your Zoom options and sections as ways to create not only more structure, but more interaction and flexibility to your presentations. Definitely try these out for your own presentations. Or you might see some ideas where it makes sense to start even fresh from scratch. And that's one of the things we talked about in our last training as well. Now, here's another possibility. One of the things that happens is we talked briefly about animation. Transitions are animation between slides. And so it is just simply that something that might introduce a slide. And you'll find that under the Transitions tab, This right now, this one is fade, and that simply means that when that comes in, it fades. If you use the transitions, they can be a really good option. Couple tips about that. First of all, you might want to be careful about getting too over carried away. You can see that there's lots of different possibilities here. So if, let's say I'm here and maybe a little bit more, you know, you might not want to do something like glitter. Remember, it introduces it, that, you know, or honeycomb or blinds. That is, some of these more exciting ones should be used in very limited. It shouldn't be that you use that for every single slide, for instance. So if you use transitions, it's good to, first of all, not have a transition between every single slide. And second, only pick up to like 2 or 3 different options. So it's not about, oh, well, here's another cool one and here's another interesting one. So limit what those are. And I have a tendency to do something much more subtle, whether it's a fade or otherwise, because it adds a little visual interest without being distracting. But every once in a while, I might add a page curl or something like that. But here again, limit the variety of transitions that you use and don't transition to every single slide. There's a special type of transition, and that is called morph. Now, it is really more of, I'll say, a special purpose. It isn't something probably that will come up all the time for you. Let me go ahead and find it, hopefully. There we go. See that section got collapsed. All right. So let's look at the idea of a morph transition. It means that when we have a morph transition, it is able to change from one slide to another with the same kind of content. So let's say, for instance, we have something like this, and I'm not suggesting that this is an amazing, beautiful slide, but it has text and shapes. Now let's see what happens to both the text and those shapes as we go to the next slide. So morph is actually able to then automatically change. All you're going to do is you're going to copy the first slide, move things around and modify them, and then add the morph transition. So I'll show that to you in a moment. Here's another example. This is just simply how text could be used. Those are individual characters, not just one word. Same idea here. Or go back to one of our first examples. Now, if I want to focus in on that first stage, then that would be another way to morph it. So here's how this works. Here I have a slide that has the morph. Here, this just has some shapes and some other elements. I'm going to Control D, oops. There we go. Going to copy it. So here's my first one. Here's my second one. So the morph is somewhat limited in that it will work with shapes. It will work with text. And it does work with those icons, but it won't work with absolutely every piece of content that you have. So it's something to try out. But this is my copy. This is my second slide. I'll take that shape, move it over, take the other one and maybe change that, change the dimensions of it. And perhaps I want to change the color for it and do the same for this one. And so you can see the idea here without taking too much time for it, but we could take that text, for instance, and maybe I want to make that significantly larger. And we'll make it bold. It could even be a different style. what happens then is that PowerPoint will review, here's the first one, here's the second one, and it will make those transitions. So I go to transitions, add morph. So I'm adding this to the second slide, the copy, and notice how it changes that for me. So it's something that you might find interesting or helpful, or just another piece, but something just to consider in terms of working with it. Let's explore a couple other options that are built in that might add some interest as well. So let's touch on video, and then if we have time, a few tricks with graphics. So here again, we have then our section slide. I'll go ahead and launch that. And this is one of the stock images that is video. So you don't have to have something, you don't have to pay for the video. If you can find an image that would be interesting or helpful, there we go. And using design ideas, we could create even a little bit different one without having to have a lot of creativity in our genes. So that's another possibility for us. And that simply is then something that's built in. So you can certainly get video. And we may want sometimes to link to video that's available, let's say, on on our YouTube site, for instance. But let's look at how we could take advantage of that video feature. Once again, it's insert. And in this case, now what we're going to do is we're going to go to video. And that's on the far right-hand side. Here are stock videos. Now, we could have done insert image and then just switched over to videos. So that becomes another option for us. And you can see the right here that we're going to start seeing more and more options over time in terms of what's available to us. I don't know, those donuts look pretty yummy there, but that's another possibility for us. So here, I'll go ahead and just add this nature scene. And so this is then going to be added. And now you can see the design ideas. Well, how would I want to present that? Maybe this is one option, or here's another one. So we have some possibilities with that. Now, what happens with that video? Well, if it's selected, we look, first of all, here's our video format. So you can make some changes to the appearance, the border, things like that. And here's the playback. In this case, maybe I want it to play automatically. I could loop until stop, or I could just simply, it could keep going and going and going. Let's go ahead and play that. Okay. How about if I run the slide? Notice how it automatically starts. So that becomes an option for you as well, either to insert your own videos or to add others. So you could insert your own if you have a video file. You also, another option is to simply say insert video and online video. Now, here, if it's something that your organization has on YouTube, then you could simply put in the address for that. That's the idea here. And so this is an example of one of our previous webinar topics. And so at this time, then what I could do with that is let's look at the playback. I might want it to be something that I would click on it. And so the size of it will be however I've sized it. And now if I go to that slide, now I'll click on it to run it. And so this could be built in. And so that can be an advantage as well. That is, what we don't want to do is just simply put in a hyperlink that takes us outside to YouTube, away from our presentation. And then this is usually where things get really clunky and we lose attention. If we can build all of these elements, whether it's a stock image video, it's a video file that you have, or it's a link to something, still when you're using video, have that be self-contained. Now it does create a little bit larger file, certainly, and you want to make sure that, but typically now storage is not so much of an issue for us. So I just simply want to share that is something else to consider in terms of how you would work with it. Now, let's look at a couple other really quick options, some tricks for graphics. Here again, the whole idea is how can we save time yet create some really fun or interesting images for us. So for instance, here's an image that's part of that stock image. Well, it doesn't have to be a stock image. Maybe it's an image that you have that is for a product or service or something that is related to your business. Now, once that's selected, have some options under picture format. And one of these is to remove the background. So go ahead and remove the background. And sometimes, it gets a little, we have to get a little bit creative here. I want to keep this. So mark areas to keep. I don't want to lose that part of this friendly looking owl. So I might have to play around with it a little bit, but you can see it's really smart. And this has gotten a lot better, by the way, over time. There we go. All right, that looks good. I'm going to keep the changes. Now let's add something to this. I'll go to Insert, Pictures, Stock Images. And I usually don't introduce or mention, but I like to pretend that I can golf. I usually it is not really what we call golfing in any way. So go ahead and size that to make that look a little better. And under my picture format, I'll go ahead and send this to the back. Take our little owl here. And now we actually are using the combination between two different of the stock images that we can also use to create some visual interest and just to have some fun with that as well. And then finally, if you are creating, once again, some different kinds of visuals, in this case, this is just a text box laid over an image. Once again, it's one of our stock images. But if I wanted to actually pick up on this color, it's an easy thing to do. I'll select the text box. And here's my shape format. And I want to change my shape fill. I'll just go to shape fill and use what's called the eyedropper. So I'm actually going to pick the color from this image. And there we go. So many of these options are just built into PowerPoint to make life a lot easier for us without having to have a lot of design background and to really create much more visual interest. I hope that you've had multiple takeaways in terms of how you can engage more effectively with PowerPoint. What are some ways to create more interaction and some more visual appeal? We offer these training webinars on the second Tuesday of every month. I hope you will join us for our upcoming sessions that include Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, and working with tasks in Microsoft 365. So look for our emails to let you know about these upcoming sessions. We certainly invite you to join us and to take advantage of these training opportunities through K-Squared Technologies. That's been our look today at increasing engagement with PowerPoint. We hope to see you next month. In the meantime, how can we help you to be more productive? Please reach out to us for IT services and consulting to support you with Microsoft technologies. Thanks for joining us.